Great. Hey, good afternoon. Heck of an interesting meal, right? Lots of good stuff there. What we're going to do here is just a little bit of background on myself. Worked for Deere in Waterloo, Iowa, big tractor country, not combine country, for like 41 years. Had a lot of fun, retired, and couldn't stay away from agriculture. Grew up on a farm, so it's been fun getting back and talking to different people and all of that. Some of you have been doing Kernza for like 10, 15 years now, I've understood. I get to do one John Deere war story out of this deal, right? That's part of the agreement. A long time ago, in the late 1990s, I was the engineering manager for little tractors at Deere. And in Waterloo, Iowa, nobody cares about little tractors, but we had a lot of fun. We drug our top management out to an undisclosed location in the desert, showed them an autonomous tractor running around, and said, hey, you know, we ought to look at this. This is good stuff here. It's important and all of that. Well, they kind of got around to it, but it took 27 years. So the message here for you all, for some of you have been at this for like 15 years from what I gathered this morning. So hang in there. You only got about another 10 years and then you'll be in the mainstream. So someday you'll talk to your grandchildren and you'll say, hey, go to your shiny new combine book and you go to the list of crops and it'll say intermediate wheatgrass. Right now you have to figure it out, and that's part of the issue that people struggle with. So don't give up. You'll get there. I was gonna try to do a roll call thing, but I've got to talk to a bunch of you and all that. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of after lunch exercise here with your choice of left or right hand. How many of you are currently growing Kernza? That's good. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Are some of you thinking about it, but you're not yet growing it? Okay, I got one back. Okay, good. And you're welcome. That's great. How many of you are from Minnesota? Okay, good. And I know we got some folks from Kansas and Iowa. Looks like it's a great big hole in the map. So, how many of you are direct cutting your Kernza versus swathing it? Mostly swathing. How many of you? Any of you using stripper heads? Okay, good. So there's good experience there. And if you have any questions about that, the good PhD back there, Brandon's going to take care of it. So we'll go from there. How's that for setup? Good. So in the old days, it wasn't that hard. You just cut the wheat and stack it up, and away you go. Not too bad. Then the platform, you get how big a platform you want. You round up a few more people, no problem. Separation, okay, didn't need to worry about whether it was a cylinder or rotor. You just beat the grain off. So the basics have not changed. Interestingly, if you look at this machine, granted the engine's off in the distance, but the engine's been moving around on combines for a while. But the basic architecture and structure of that machine is almost identical to what you're doing today. The fundamentals really haven't changed. There's a little handout, and it's got this graphic in it, which might, in my mind, might be one of the most important pieces of paper. For those of you who aren't having a real good time yet with your Kernza harvest, it's kind of worth looking at. But the threshing process, the basic principles are, I got to get the grain cut, that's the head, and then you go to number 6 here, the cylinder, and that can be a cylinder, that can be a rotor. Get the seed off the crop, right? That's step 1. Step 1 is get it cut, get it off the crop, and then once you're done there, then you get separated the grain. And you go out from there, and then the good stuff ends up in the tank. Some of it gets recycled, and away you go. So that principle, and if you didn't, it surprised me. I had an older combine for some of my plot work, and it had a really nice schematic, kind of like this. It says, here's the theory of operation, all that, and then here's how you set it up. You get in a more modern machine and it gives you lots of buttons to push, and they talk about the buttons, but they don't explain what you're trying to do. You have to kind of figure that out. So that's where this is kind of interesting. And And a rotor versus cylinder, not a big deal. Fundamentally, that's just the one step. That's to knock the grain off the stalk or whatever. The cleaning structure, the screening, and all of that is essentially identical whether it's a rotary or a cylinder combine. So your fundamental mindset does not have to be what color or what architecture do I have. I just have to understand the basics. And the basics is how fast do I turn the cylinder. And if you look in the book for things like corn, everything is slow and grinding to get the kernels off, except when you talk about wheat or something like Kernza, you want things spinning fast. And then you go start moving air through the system. In corn, it's not at all aerodynamic, and it's heavy, so you can blow a whole bunch of air through it, but you can't do that with wheat. So just about everything that you would have your corn combine set up for is exactly wrong for wheat. And I'm sure you all know that, and I expect most of you are starting with a wheat machine or a machine that's set up for wheat, and then you go from there. So you got a smaller grain. We were looking at some pieces over lunch, and it's, you got your work cut out for you. Big old machine. So the fundamentals are really, really that simple. How do I get the grain off the crop? And then how do I separate the grain from the residue? And all the rest of that is just pesky details. Now, in a little bit of the research I did on the Kernza, you're kind of stuck because, especially if you're direct cutting it, even the crop doesn't have the nice uniform drying characteristic. It's a little too dry at the top, just right in the middle, and a little too wet at the bottom. And it's like, don't get too greedy by trying to get too much in there. You're going to end up with a wet sample. And it's okay to spin a little bit out the back, but you hate to do that because that's not why you're there. So that's the sort of thing that Brandon has walked a lot of you through, or can help you, and a lot of that kind of experience. My really simple version to go after this is start with a really clean machine, number one, and a lot of machines operate in a zone, but over time they haven't been really stretched as far as level of adjustment and all of that. So where it's variable speed drives or whatever, making sure that you have the full range of cylinder speed or the full range of fan speed, so that you don't get stuck in a mode where I just can't get there and now I'm blowing stuff through or whatever. And Kernza seems like it's one of the smallest seeds around that you're having to harvest, so you kind of want to look down at the choices that you have in the documentation you have. Hopefully none of you have a clean operator's manual. Hopefully they should all be dirty and grimy and in the back seat of the machine and not in the file cabinet back home, because it is your friend. But you kind of have to want to really understand. It's pretty interesting. My son is a pilot, and there's something you do when you're flying an airplane. You make one change and then you wait and see what happens, and then if you need to make another change, you do that. You don't make a bunch of changes all at once, you get in trouble. I think that's very much the case here also. So when you're getting not the right amount or the right mix of what you want in the tank or in what's going out the back of the machine, make a change in one of the variables, either more speed or less speed, or more clearance or less clearance on the cylinder, or more air or less air on the fan, or changing the shaft screen settings and that sort of thing. So you got all those things. So adjust, run it, and evaluate it. It's really important. If I were to make one suggestion that you take home, other than having this piece of paper with you, would be commit yourself to having a quality control person with you. How many of you go out and set your machine by yourself? One. You poor guy. And so it's just really important to either have somebody that can run the machine and you're watching it and you're looking at, you become the quality control. or you run it, and then you've got somebody that's back there catching the residue and that sort of stuff. It just, the temptation is like, hey, we're in a hurry here, you know, it's prom night or homecoming football game or whatever. We got things to do. The cycle time of run, measure, and then adapt from there, I think can be accelerated greatly. I have found that whenever I'm doing something, if I've got somebody else there looking over my shoulder, it makes me better, and all of that. So that is the very short essence of what I have for you. I'm sure there's no rocket science there. I'm struck by how different new machines are from old machines. I think people are, from what I understand, people are trying to get to where you pick a crop as a button and then the AI and the machine figures it out and goes from there. I'm thinking that probably the first thing you want to do with that is shut it off, and because you are now the non-artificial intelligence. You're the one that's going to have to figure out how to run this, because the people that build the machines are building them for a litany of crops, but they're all based on averages and conditions, and even through the day, conditions change and all of that. So. With that, Brandon, you want to introduce yourself and up here, and we'll start any questions for me. Really easy questions. He gets the hard ones. Any? Yes, sir.
When you first came across Kernza and somebody explained what you're going to help us solve today, was it a really complicated question, or I guess I'm kind of curious from your experience with other crops?
It's Wendy's fault. She made me come here. I heard about it. I'm a fan of Keith Burns' Green Cover. Does a lot of cover crop stuff. In my little other life, if you Google my name, you'll come up with stuff on 60-inch corn, wide row corn, that sort of stuff. I perked up when I saw you talking about intercrops and Kernza, because that looks like a beautiful thing. My shtick is wide row corn with something in between, and hopefully a highly diverse mix. Kernza could be one of those. At some of the meetings I've been at with Green Cover, they were talking about Kernza, because the Land Institute is one of their sponsors. So kind of like, well, what's that, And then the conversation with Wendy came up. It's an interesting product. Where's the tipping point on what it's going to use, and why would people use it? From my simple-minded deal, it should be nice to find a way to have it be a good cash flow, good for the soil, and good for what you're doing without having to harvest it, because that looks like that's the hardest part. Some of the guys I've talked to said, well, once you get it figured out, it's not hard. That's true of a lot of problems. Once you get them figured out. I'm not sure I'm answering your question. Did I answer your question?
I guess I was curious again, more as Kernza would flow through like a combine compared to all the other grains that
Yep.
go through there. What stands out for you?
It's small size. It's small size, and the fact that most of it's going to get another process after it gets done, because you're going to dehull it and separate the seed, and the fact that it's so easy to blow the part you want the most out the back. If that's probably most of you have put a lot more out the back than you would have liked to over the years. Yes, sir.
So for that one instance, we figured out the best way to do it is with a stripper header, but now, you're literally running nothing through the combine, there's nothing coming out the back end. Like, is that hard on the machine at all?
I have a prejudicial opinion that old cylinder separator combines, I think, are easier to run light than a modern rotary. I have an old 6620 I use as a plot machine. I harvest corn one row at a time, slowly. But I've gotten to where I can get exactly what I want in the tank, and it handles it just fine. I think that's harder to do in a rotor, and you have to kind of have a little. I mean, you want to run things really tight.
But is there any risk to the Just the
I,
fact that you're running everything wide open with no material passing through.
yeah, I think the fundamental process, the physics of it is the same. The art is to have the head, the cylinder rotor running fast enough and tight enough, you get the hull and the seed separated and not have any of the straw pieces that are going to end up out the back. And then the other part of it is to get the airflow low enough. Because most machines are oriented to high productivity and ever bigger heads and go faster. And the more going through, the better they like it. And that's kind of their sweet spot. So you're really taking the machine in a place it wasn't really designed to be, but there's no reason why you can't do it. There's some that I'm an old tractor guy, but it always amazed me with combine guys. The first time they get in the machine, the first thing they do is open it wide open. But almost everything on the machine is sized for the fans running full tilt and the shakers running full tilt. You don't idle a combine down if you're harvesting. I try it maybe, but I'd worry about stuff getting plugged up and ending up in the wrong places and all that. It's a pretty fine-tuned machine for an incredible variety of material and an incredible variety of conditions. I've said many times the corn planter is the most important piece of equipment on a corn farm. I think the combine's the hardest task on the farm. And if you screw it up, you're seeding a problem for next year, and you're not getting what you spent all year trying to get. Sorry for the long answer. Yes, sir.
Just to his comment, in my opinion would be, if it was well maintained, I think there's no difference, but when the machine works under a little bit of a load, it's probably better for it. That's just, that's my thoughts. Having some load instead of, say having a diesel engine running wide open with no load versus some minor load, it might not prematurely wear as bad. I don't know. Maybe just as bad as being overloaded and you're stressing all the components.
Yeah. You're the lone stripper guy here, I think. Do you think it's easier or harder to do a good job of the rest of the threshing process now that you have the stripper head?
It was a game changer.
It's not easier? It is easier.
It's a piece of cake, yeah, with the stripper header.
A lot less material going through.
You're eliminating the stems, yeah. But
Yeah.
now it's literally those little tiny stems.
Yeah.
Is all, it's not even, most of the time it's not even taking the heads off. It's just ripping the seeds right out of the heads.
Okay. I will confess I'd not heard of a stripper head until this morning, and now I've seen a picture of them. And I understand they have kind of a European background, and they're pretty pricey.
Are you able to harvest lodge Kernza with that?
You'd be running it's these really fast rotating fingers, and there's aluminum, you'd be running those into the dirt. So I've seen guys harvest lentils with them. That's if you have good lodge around, but I like that it's 2.5 feet off the deck.
Well, and it looked like it really worked in down lodged.
We don't have to worry about lodging.
Richard, I'm going to put you on the spot. Richard has grown grass seed for many years, and would you care to make any comments about the similarity between harvesting grass seed and Kernza, and kind of your experience with these very light kernels?
So, yeah, just to give you a little background, so I'm from northern Minnesota, we've been growing grass seed forever. Kernza isn't light in our scheme of light things, so we grew up growing Kentucky bluegrass, which cleaned is 14 to 15 pounds per bushel. Growing native grasses, some of those go under 10 pounds per bushel. All harvested with a normal combine, with limited modification. So some of the lightest things we actually do get into a little bit of modifying like that. Generally, Kernza isn't that light. When you dehull it, you're almost at wheat test weights. If you got down to completely dehulled seed, you're So you've got a pretty heavy endosperm inside that kernel. So part of it is getting it down as close to that endosperm as you can. It makes your combining life go easier, or setting the machine.
Yeah.
You know, and again, I've got experience with stripper heads, not in Kernza, but in other crops. We actually took a stripper head out into Reganeri after lodge, just because we were having so much problems. Same thing, we're harvesting in berry green. If we were straight cutting, we had to go down into the leaves, and all those leaves just really make a mess going to the combine. So we were able to take a stripper head and go in there and strip it off, and actually work better. The first time we'd ever used it was this year in Reganeri, but it actually worked better. But the challenge you get is you've got so little material going through the machine that I think, you know, generally in Kernza, if I was going to use a stripper head, I'd probably want to put cover plates on the concave or on the front part of the rotor to grind it up more, to get more. You know, it's not, you're not trying to save it for seed. You don't have to worry about generally damaging the seed. So you're trying to beat it up as much as you can as soon as you can.
Yeah.
The rest of the machine works on it. I don't know if that went for you. Expecting.
Yeah, and then how about your fan speed setting?
You know, fan we've had case combines, John Deere conventional combines. We're running John Deere rotors now. We've had ran Lexions for quite a few years. All depends on the machine, because like the machine you've got sitting out here, the fan speeds will generally be lower for the same crop than they will be like the newer series Deere machines. It's, you know, like the bluegrass, we would be running this one probably 450 RPM fan. We're on a new machine, we're probably, you know, doing the equivalent job, we're running 700. You know, again, it all depends on how the fans are constructed in the machine. So one fan setting, you know, RPMs doesn't, you know, translate to other machines. You know.
Yeah, it's an aerodynamic.
Yeah.
What the blades look like and all that. At some point, do you find generally your issue with air is too much rather than not enough?
No, I would say that most of the problems you see in these samples are from not enough air.
Oh, really? Okay.
Partly is you're trying to get that stratification on that top sieve. You've got to get that light material off the sieve, you know, so it can separate. If it's coming down the top sieve as a mat, you know, all that light and straw, the seed has a hard time getting out, you know, shaking through to get to your bottom sieve. So if you use enough air to get that lighter material to get off the sieve a little bit, and this machine like this is one of the easiest ones to see. You can walk behind it and you can see the stuff lifting off the sieve.
Yeah.
You know, again, if it's coming in that lift, then you are blowing it out. If it's coming right off the top, you know, that top sieve, it probably is just riding out that it can't separate. So even though it looks like a small light seed, you use a lot more wind than you'd expect. It's not corn, it's not soybean, that type of wind, but it's more than you think.
Okay. Brandon, any comments on any of that?
Before we go outside, these samples are really nice, and I thought everyone should take a look at them.
Yep.
This one is the one with the stems, so we shouldn't ever have any of these in the bin of our combine. This should be something that you can avoid. It's a lot harder if you're swathing and picking it up and it's really, really crisp and dry. Sometimes they'll be in there, but in general they shouldn't be there. This sample is called Air Screen Cleaner Output. And what I notice about this sample that I think is important is that, you know, Kernza grows on a tiller that has a spike at the top, and then there's a bunch of spikelets. Each spikelet can have, you know, 1 to, I don't know, potentially 15 seeds or something like that. Often 3, 4, or 5. If you don't have if you're not threshing that spikelet and you get the whole spike in the grain bin at the end, oftentimes the first step when you take it to a place, you're going to run it across an air screen that's scalping, taking off, you know, stems and big things like that. And those spikelets are just going to run off the top of the top screen, and that's not going to count as yield. And maybe it's not important right now because all of us are trying really hard as cleaners to get the most out of it, and they might save it and run it back through. But it's going to come a day really, really soon where it's not going to be worth the time and effort for the people that are cleaning it to save that. And so unless you have like a debearder or some other rethreshing piece of equipment in front of the screener, that's going to be thrown away probably. So that's kind of something I think is probably important. And then the thing that we've learned most with our growers in Kansas is that this is a pretty nice sample. This is possible to get right out of the combine probably. we've started sending bags like this to our growers, just so they know what it can look like. And I think, it sounds silly, but that's really important because most of us are corn or bean growers and we haven't seen something like this before. But this sample, I think, is the end result, and you can get this out of a combine, especially like a 9410 or 9400 that's out there. So it's possible. I think that's like the take-home message is it's possible, and we should be working hard individually to get to this, depending on what machine we use. So.
Maybe just to add a little bit, so we actually cleaned our own things too on our farm, and I work closely with a number of cleaners, so, the thing is, you don't wanna bring it, so some guys be combining, it's going to a cleaning plant, we don't need to worry about cleaning it up. Leave it to Brandon to figure that out.
Yeah.
The better job you do at the combine, the better job Brandon can do at the cleaning plant. There's more recovery, so getting rid of as much of that, advantageous material in the field is the best thing you can do to help your yield in the end. Trying to save everything into the hopper is your worst enemy. We run into this in Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass, virtually any grass growing.
And you should remember, like it might cost us, let's say it costs us, $400 an hour to run the line with the labor and the equipment and things like that. And so, we've seen in our examples, sometimes we'll get, 300 pounds an hour is all that we recover of Kernza. And sometimes we'll get 2,000 pounds an hour. And so you can think about how that affects the end cost of the Kernza and what the cleaner is going to charge you for doing that. So yeah, it matters.
And if it comes in with that long sticks, it doesn't go down tubes, it doesn't feed the machines, it creates a huge headache for the cleaners. So that's.
Let me just reiterate that, is that just screws up the supply chain downstream and causes lots to get rejected when it shows up like that. So you can't be having these, big pieces of straw, or you really shouldn't have, I'd say you shouldn't have any pieces of straw over that. I don't know.
If a semi came to me like this, I bet it would take 4 hours just to get it out of the semi. I mean, it would bridge and be really, really hard. And so when it comes like this to us, I charge the growers $1,000 an hour, and I run it through a combine. I auger it out of the truck into a combine, and I charge them for that, and then we do the cleaning stuff. So
So a stationary combine is a cleaning machine?
yeah, and it stinks because usually you have to stop because the pile's so big. You have to stop, move the auger, move the combine, get a loader, push the pile away, put it all back together, run it again. So you can do that 3 times in a semi-load if it looks like that. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a question over here.
Yeah, Richard talked about kind of smashing it right away when it gets in the machine. I'm not a combine expert by any stretch, but in my brain that makes sense. You bash as much of the grain out of it as you can, then you can have the separation, you can have a little more air, the light stuff can flow out. Is that the kind of direction that you recommend as well, Brandon?
When we started cleaning and I was getting stuff like this, that's what I recommended. I think as a community, we're going to be learning a lot in the next 3-4 years about the end use of the grain. And what I've seen ourselves is that once we start adding, adding RAS bars and really getting aggressive about it, I've started cracking a lot of kernels, which ultimately reduces your yield. So we'll clean out a lot of little broken pieces that maybe someday could go to some other end use. And we've also sometimes limited the germination viability of the grain, which is really key if there's ever going to be a malting industry that develops. And then the other thing that we notice is that if we start cracking the grain, we reduce sort of the long-term storage viability as well. There's a lot of fats in Kernza. And so we can get some rancidity problems a little bit sooner. So if it's your first time, I would tell you, be as aggressive as possible because you probably don't know how aggressive you can be. But as we develop as an industry and we start seeing like certain fields and certain geographies going to certain places, I think we're going to change that a little bit like oats. Sometimes people want to be really aggressive on oats, and sometimes in barley you want to leave the holes on. So I think the answer to the question is that we don't know yet. If you're just starting, I would try to be as aggressive as possible. But
I think that cracking issue really comes down to your environment.
yeah, we're hot and dry, so.
They're hot and dry, and you know, we're harvesting generally around the 1st of September, you know, moderate temperatures, generally we've got more humidity, so that's, I'm generally saying in our area, I don't think you can ever over thrash or
Really?
at any point you can really break it up.
Okay.
But if you were in 20% humidity at 90 degrees,
Yeah.
that's a little different ballgame.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got a question? Any downside to allowing the grain to run through the returns 2 or 3 times?
Can't.
Either of you.
Where I live, the faster you farm, the more acres you get, and the better it is. So if it has to go through the return 2 or 3 times, you're going to drive a lot slower probably. It shouldn't have to go through the return 2 or 3 times in my experience. Maybe on a newer rotary machine, you'd have to, but we should remember, I guess we'll talk about that outside, but in my experience with the rotary machines is that, you know, when we see loss, we're usually not seeing loss over the sieves. We're not blowing it out in my experience. We're usually seeing rotor loss where it's not coming out of the separator itself. So that would be my fear, is if I don't.
What I was concerned about is breaking up those florets initially. Sometimes they are almost impossible to break up.
You know, and that's what you're trying to do in return, break up that stuff. You know, your analogy going around 2 or 3 times, that maybe can be true to start with, but if you keep running it 2 or 3 times around, you're gonna have to plug return in
Yep.
5 minutes.
Yep.
It doesn't have the capacity. It all depends on how much material you're putting through that return. It really
Correct.
comes down.
Correct.
Whether it has to go around 1 time or 10 times, but you just can't overload the return.
Yeah, that's obviously, you obviously adjust it accordingly, but
It's good to see things in the return.
that's my point. It's good to see something in the returns, yes.
Could you put your cross-section back up again, by chance? And then my question to all of you is, could you talk about the relationship between fan speed and the opening or closing of the lower sieve?
Well, the top sieve, so the fan, well, it does affect the bottom sieve too, because the top sieve and the fan speed are interconnected, because it's kind of about velocity coming off those fans. So the tighter that sieve with the same fan speed setting, you get more velocity, you know, blow it up. You know, again, you can mimic turning the fan down by opening the top sieve. It also lets bigger material come through, but the fan speed and the top sieve kind of work hand in hand to get that, to put, you know, push the light seed up further away from the sieve and keep the heavy stuff on the sieve.
Does the fan air go through the bottom sieve first?
You kind of can see in the diagram, generally it's split. The fan is blowing to both through the bottom sieve and,
Okay.
you know, kind of depends
It's
on
kinda
the machine.
clu-
So actually, your machines will have a free segment where the fan goes directly through the grain stream with it all going through sieve even. It just, that's your first opportunity to get light stuff off the,
And then the more open the sieves are, the more air that's coming through, and so that's,
at a slower speed,
yeah, right.
less velocity.
Yeah, right. The tighter it is, the faster it goes, but the less air gets
The more
going.
you put through the returns,
Not necessarily.
on your bottom,
You know, again, if you're cleaning it up enough before it gets there.
okay, then.
Any comments on fans and sieves?
There's lots of kinds of combines, and you're going to have to play with each kind, I think. So, but I think in general, you know, I know some of us are, so there's small seed kits you can buy for different combines. That's going to help you adjust. If you can't, like the R series gleaner combines, I've always had problems for people. If you don't have a small seed kit, then you're going to have to put pieces of cardboard or pieces of plywood or some way to slow the intake of air down a little bit. But in general, you start somewhere and then begin playing with it. So.
So one of the things I think maybe you've got to sample around is the stuff that looks like seed that isn't filled. And you've got the lights off
Yeah.
the mills.
Yep.
So you look at that bag, it all looks like seed when you look at it. But, you know, if you start running those out, there's very little or no use from inside. But one of the things we found in ryegrass is you take a flashlight and you take some of that seed and put it on top of the flashlight, then it turns translucent, you can see how much endosperm's in it. If there's no endosperm, it should go back on the field, it shouldn't go in the grain.
Yep.
Because when it goes over the airstream machine at Brandon's place, the first thing he's gonna do is blow out all those lights, so he could just about do it in the field.
Do you have a question on it?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you've used an airfoil shafter at all. Is that something that, you know, would help pull the shaft off?
You know, we've used them before in small grains. We don't have them in any machines anymore, but that's essentially what an airfoil does. Everything's done with the fan speed, so it's controlling that velocity out, over a fixed opening. So it's kind of doing what we're talking about. But, I'm sure an airfoil would work fine, in terms of too.
Is it worth purchasing one, or do you think that could be done with like an inch-and-a-half shafter?
I think it'd be done with conventional chapter. I don't think I'd go through the extra expense of putting an airfoil in.
Out of curiosity, how much time do most of you spend to get the machine dialed in when you first start? Is this like an hour or a half day or?
How big is the field?
And is there a football game that night?
When you're finished, the combine is properly adjusted.
Well, yeah, it's a dynamic. I mean, it even through the day, so. Wendy,
Bob, engineering-wise,
don't say that.
when did they change, or why did they change the thresholds on the fan speeds? Like the newer ones, the newer combines?
They don't go as slow, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Why did they do that? And
Well, not knowing, okay, I can tell my wife, I'm just gonna make something up. I would bet that it's to get the higher end covered with the capabilities they had to get more capacity through the machine. Combine engineers live and die by bushels per hour. That's their whole goal. So this is really kind of a niche application. Now, normally Deere is pretty good, and everybody is good about having kits to slow things down or to baffle or close up and all of that. So the more you get into the niche side of things, then the more of that sort of stuff you end up having to avail. But it was probably, if I had to guess, Wendy, it was probably optimizing the machine for productivity.
But you look at it up until the 1990s, you had a picture of the threshing machine. Up until the 1990s, the fan looked the same as it did on that threshing machine, with flat blades and big round housing. Now they've gone to, it's more like a turbine fan.
Okay.
Diagram.
Interesting.
But again, I suspect that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe I'll make one comment. If you're using a custom operator, and I'll be interested to hear your feedback on this. But my sense is that to thresh Kernza, you set the machine at kind of its limits. So you spin the rotor as fast as possible, you make the clearance as tight as possible. I think sometimes I'll have to, I won't say on the sieves, but I think people, and so it depends on the custom operator that you're working with. If somebody hasn't harvested Kernza before, they probably have never set their combine at that setting. And some custom operators are very reluctant to go to that extreme setting, and that's going to have direct impacts on the quality of threshing and separating that happens. So I guess maybe if you're checking out custom operators, maybe just try to get a sense of, is this person open to coaching and suggestions, or are they pretty I've never stood it up there, I don't want to do that. So I don't know. Any comments?
Well, one thing you find, machines that have probably been in mostly corn and soybeans, they generally don't get run up that tight, and they might not, there might be enough trash and stuff built up, they might not be able to pull them up tight while cleaning out some stuff. Again, if they're sitting, with that concave probably as tight as only half open, when you want to take it all the way up there, stuff in the way that may not let it go up all the way. So
Yeah.
and I think Bob's going to talk about, you need to check the concave out to make sure it's level side to side. I think you can probably talk about that.
Yep. Well, you want the full range.
And making sure it'll come up all the way. And then on a conventional machine, the rear of the concave, that's set where it's supposed to be for the machine.
I grow small grains, oats and barley, so I was accustomed to setting it up tight to fan speed and chaffer settings. But when I harvested his for the first time, I had no idea. I knew how to try to minimize the florets or the straw in the tank, but what was an acceptable, you know, maybe if you had a sample to show the guy and be like, well, this is, you know, kind of, I never done it before, so I was learning like he was. You know, and I was okay with setting the machine and tweaking it and trying to get the best result, but it was, I never even hardly heard of it before, let alone,
Right.
well, we'll learn together, I guess, you know.
I think that's a good point. And having a sample of what it should look like helps you a lot trying to set your machine. You know what you're.
Yeah, well, what's an acceptable limit, you know, because if it, you're not gonna get it de-hulled all the way, you know, but, so I treated it like oats or barley or rye, you know, and just kind of tweaked it from there, you know, to try to optimize it, but not ever doing it, we kind of were like, well, is this good enough, or back to the cleaning stages, you know?
Yep.
Well, we took a picture and then I sent it to Carmen, is it good enough?
Well, I think Richard made a really good point. I mean, that's when I'm going to set the combine for people in the fields. Oftentimes, even the top sieve. So if they're a small grains guy, the top sieve is going to be so packed full of either corn stalks or chaff, whatever, that you can't even close the top sieve. So often the first thing we do is show them how to take it out, how to blow it out with an air compressor, and then. So there's a lot of steps like that. We're just corn and soy and even small grain guys aren't used to. It's going to take time, and that's maybe the hardest part about working with a custom operator is how much. You know, I talked about farming as fast as you can. I mean, that's how custom operators get paid, and so figuring out how to help them decide to slow down, and go through those steps. That's a tough thing to do. So.
Or maybe pay them, you know, explicitly pay them.
So much for the day, or whatever. Yeah.
Or something like that.
Or like clean it out when it's still in the barn, and that when you're out in the field, you're like, oh no, my sieve slowly flows. And then they're pissed off because you have to like roll it back or just say no.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Brandon,
tough.
I think those samples are golden. That's a really.
I don't know who brought them, but they're
That's
great.
a
I
brilliant
didn't bring these,
layout.
so.
It would be cool if part of getting into the licensing of Kernza and all that, if you end up with the little packet that the organization sent, or at best, really good digital photography that was scaled with something or other, could be a really, in this little handout thing, there's a page that just, no graphics, but it says here, you know, here's how to thresh Kernza, and it's got about a half a dozen things that you do, and it's just really simple. Some really good imagery would be really helpful, I would think, especially for the people that are starting out or are working with a new provider. That's the whole expectation management thing there.
Will you hold up the one again that you want it to look like when it comes to you?
This little small bag's pretty nice. I think we should be able to get to this. It's just not labeled.
That came out, that's been run.
This has been run? Well, good job, whoever did this one. So,
Should we transition outside?
I have one more question. Kurt or Brandon, do you run any of those rotary cleaners after combining? Those are like big in Wisconsin.
so I don't, and I don't want to. It's like an extra step to add in front of the cleaning. There's like those rotary cleaners that some people might use to clean their own seed wheat or things like that. So, yeah.
Quick clean's different, that's augers and screens. I think what she's talking, more of the corner cleaners where they have actual screens. And they aren't that useful in Kernza because that strong, you know, seems like it should ride out, and some of it will, but a lot of it will tip up and drop through again. You know, you have limited gain with the rotary cleaner like that.
You could blow the seed out of it inside.
There's no air on
Those small-
rotary.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, better do it with the combine. Like
Tho-
the
that's-
last time, when the majority sample comes in.
That's the best
thing
thing to do.
Back through the combine again.
Yeah.
I've never used one of those, I just get questions about it all the time because people have them for rye and wheat.
Yeah. We don't use them. So. I have a machine called a scalperator that you can put in front that sometimes will take stems out before you run it into the cleaner, but that slows things down too. So the first thing that I want people to do when they bring Kernza to me before they start cleaning is to clean out the combine really well, right? It might be the first thing you harvest that crop season. There might have been mice in it. There might be old beans or corn still in the tank from last year. I want you to take it apart, spray it out, clean it out as good as possible. And that's really important for all of us because this is a premium grain. We're selling it at the top of the food chain in the US. You know, one accident that any of us make is going to affect the industry for all of us. I talked about this word failure this morning. There was a couple articles that got published 4 or 5 years ago that took us a long time to overcome. So we're growing food. We're growing food that I want to eat, that you want to eat, and that other customers want to eat. We want to clean out our grain, our combine as much as possible. So that's always step one, and you probably want to do that depending where you are. So in Kansas, a lot of guys are just finishing up wheat harvest about the last week of June, first week of July, and Kernza's maybe 3 weeks after, a little bit later for us, winter wheat. And so, in that process, you're going to clean out the sieves. You're going to open up the machine as many outlets as you have and blow it out, vacuum it out, do whatever you can. So that's usually step one. I've played with a lot of different combines. Figuring out your air situations is pretty important. There should be a manual for each of the books that you can look to something like, there's a lot of Kentucky bluegrass harvested in the US. That's probably in your manual, maybe our alfalfa seed. Find something small and probably start about there when you're setting your combine. So what I like to do when I get to a field is to open up the return elevator, and I open up the clean grain leg as well, and purge a little bit when I get into the field. And you don't have to drive a long ways, but we want to clean out anything as best as we can. It's a good practice to do. So I always do that first. Some of us are going to want to walk behind the combine to catch what's coming out of the sieves, and that's okay. Probably you should have glasses or goggles or some kind on if there's someone that's operating it. I'm always worried about losing some grain. It's too wet and it's not threshing very well, so I usually turn the spreader off at the beginning and let a windrow fall on the ground behind me and see how much seed, if any, is still attached. Spikes or spikelets are still attached to the heads. I run it like that for a little bit, and when I'm confident that it's pulling seed off the heads, that it's threshing okay, you can either turn the spreader on and have your goggles on and try like crazy not to get beat up too bad, or you can run it a little bit and start catching and seeing what's coming over the sieves. Richard talked a lot about air. I like to have the air up as much as possible, and then kind of go down. So start high and then work your way backwards until you don't see any seed coming over. I want as much air as possible, blowing as many holes and stems and things out as possible as I'm going through it. I like to have the top sieve closed pretty far, a lot farther than I'm used to on other things. A lot of our growers I've talked about, well, you shouldn't be able to stick your fingers in there. Maybe your wife or your kids can, but you probably shouldn't be. And so we've run anywhere from like 6 millimeters on the top to even a little bit lower on some of our oldest C5 fields, up to like 8 or 9. I wouldn't think that you need, at least on a 9400 or 9410 like this, to have it open much more than that. And then as you're setting the combine, we should follow Bob's advice. We're only going to change one thing at a time. Richard said that you guys probably want to run the cylinder as fast as possible here and have your concave closed down as tight as possible. We do about the same in Kansas. Sometimes I'm not running it. the faster I go, the more grain I might crack. So I'm not always running it faster than I would run wheat or other small grains, but quick.
Brandon, do you have any suggestions on like an order of operations of which things to adjust first?
We had a question about which things that we would start first. So I'd always clean first, and then depends on the operator probably how much experience they have. But I would probably start first with the fan speed. You know, I usually want to have the top sieve closed down to part I feel comfortable with, so pretty far down. And then I'm going to play with the fan speed for a little bit, starting high and then working way down. Richard might do the opposite, I'm not sure, but
I would actually start with the concave cylinder speed. You know? And again, kind of like you're talking about fan, I would start with the tight and fast.
Yep.
You know, check your grain tank. If you don't have broken kernels, there's no need to slow it down. If you are starting to see some broken kernels, I would slow the cylinder speed down before I open the concave.
Yep.
And then, because partly that's going to affect what's happening on the sieve by what's happening on the concave. That's the only reason I do that first before I started.
So I don't know if everybody heard Richard, if the audio heard Richard, but basically Richard suggests start with closing your concave and turning your cylinder up as fast as possible, and then working your way from there. And on an older machine, you know, your gauges might not be that accurate. You can hear it, you know, close it down until you can kind of hear it tick, and then maybe back it off a little bit from there is one way to do it. He talked about looking at your sample in the grain tank, and that's been hard for me and a lot of our growers to get used to. And we turn around and we think, well, there should be stuff coming in. And so one of the things that I've started to do is drive a little bit and open the grain leg over on the other side and see how the grain looks there, instead of expecting to see, you know, 20 bushels, you know, drive a little ways and see 20 bushels in the tank. So I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but it's something that I've had to convince myself and our growers to do, and to not worry about how much is necessarily coming in, because if you're used to growing, you know, 100 bushel wheat, there's no amount that's going to come in that's going to feel like it's fitting your frame of reference.
So Brandon, are you catching it somehow in a bag or a pan, or?
I'm usually not catching this. Usually there's going to be some there, and I'm opening it up and letting the combine run a little bit and seeing what's falling to the ground.
Same thing on the clean?
Same thing on the clean side. I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but it's been a way to teach myself that it's okay.
What kind of a head do you use?
So we have one grower that's used a stripper header, but most of us have been using either a draper header or an auger. And so this year I used a 925F on a 9400, which is probably, for a 9400, is probably as wide as you want to go. You know, I don't know if have any of you slugged your machine harvesting Kernza yet? Not yet. You're doing good. When I slug the machine, my dad gets out and drives home and says, "I'll see you tomorrow." So, but yeah, Carmen.
You mentioned that top sieve fairly close. How confident are you then of not taking any of the florets off into the field? In other words, you think any of them are floating out because of the tightness of that top sieve?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Carmen's worried about the top sieve and losing spikelets basically that haven't been threshed. And I don't have experience here where it's as wet as you guys, but in general, if I have it closed tight and running fast, I don't see a lot of those spikelets coming through. I think in general, if those spikelets are coming through, it's because I haven't closed it down tight enough, or I haven't run it fast enough, or it's too wet still to harvest. So I don't know if Richard has any experience with that. You can open go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, you know, as far as the doubles and stuff, yeah, too wet or too green would be one that causes that. Again, you got to look at those doubles close, because sometimes they're empties.
Yeah.
That's why they're staying double. If they've got an endosperm inside of it, they generally will separate. But if they're half full or empty completely, they'll, you know, again, gotta know what's inside the kernels you're seeing, or
Right.
what looks like this.
Right, and your first year you might see, at least in our experience, you might see a lot of whole spikelets still, and they're almost all empties. And that's probably because we're planting it later than we really should. And so there's plants, I don't know if your first year you've noticed, some of the plants don't vernalize as quickly or at the same time as other, and so you have a lot more variation in your tiller maturity. So we've seen that our first year also. That's just kind of the way it is.
What's kind of your rule of thumb about harvest dates? Because that seems to be a pretty wide window for people up here. You know, anything from, you know, late July to early September.
I think that's probably pretty hard to answer. If you're gonna swath it and pick it up, I suppose there's pretty different dates. We've taken a we harvest when it's ready approach, and haven't really focused on dates as much ourselves. So I think a great example is we've harvested stuff July 15th in Kansas before, and we've harvested stuff like, you know, August 10th, August 12th in Kansas before. We want to wait until the seeds ripe and mature because, well, and that's how I should have started with this. So I don't know how many of you, when the first thing probably, because all of us are small, is to think about where your grain's gonna go, right? You're gonna get it in the combine and then what? If it's gonna be wet, you should have a bin with a drying floor. Maybe they sell those screw-in auger fans. I haven't had a lot of success drying things with those screw-in fans, but they'll keep your grain cool. In Kansas, when I'm harvesting, it's usually like 95 degrees, 100 degrees during the day, and like 85 at night. So we have to cool the grain down almost always. Even if it's dry, we want to put a fan in to cool the grain down.
Brandon, when is the grain ready to harvest? When do you determine to go out there?
So I used to, I want it hard, like it'll crack. That's what I used to do. We've started buying these Agritronics moisture testers. I don't know if any of you look at your wheat or beans or grain with those. So what I've started doing is I have one of those and I set it to the oat setting and I get samples of Kernza that I know are dry. No, so I get one of those deals and I open it up and I put it to the oat setting and I look at what the dry sample would be. So, you know, maybe it says it's 13% moisture with the oat curve. That doesn't really matter. And I use that to adjust whatever I'm testing in the field. So I'll put, you know, wet Kernza in there and it might show 15 or 16%, and in my mind, well, that means it's, you know, maybe a couple percentage higher. But that's been at least one frame of reference that you can do quickly and take along with you to fields, rather than bringing stuff home, putting it in a microwave or an oven and drying it down that way. So I've started doing that. I usually like to wait until the Kernza is within 1% of whatever my dry samples are on that machine, because if it's wet, you're going to be in the back of the combine pushing it down with the broom, which is not very fun, especially if you're doing, like, I've got 40 acres of alfalfa intercropped as well, and I assume that every year, because of the green pods and green leaves, no matter how I set the combine, I'm going to, you know, be in the combine, pushing it down with the broom, and going straight to a bin with a drying floor to get it dry. And I'm not that old yet. I imagine there's a day when I'm not going to be willing to do that, but that's still something that, you know, I'm 6 years in and we still have been doing that every year, so I'm not sure why, but nobody wants to do that, right? None of us really have time or energy to do that. So waiting until it's dry, it's going to thresh better, it's going to harvest better, it's going to store better. So.
Somebody without that equipment, you know, Jake and I talked about that. The Kernza seed rises from the top of the farm. So if I'm going out there with that kind of equipment, how should I be looking for the maturity of that grain?
I always harvest all the seed, so I want to take the whole head, right?
Okay.
So it doesn't really matter. You know, it depends on how, especially the newer varieties, we're not seeing I'm not seeing shattering in the newer varieties as much as I did the old varieties, so I would strip the whole heads and toss them in.
Brandon, are you able to harvest, direct harvest, close to dry in Kansas?
Yeah, I would say 95% of the stuff we harvest now never goes in a bin to dry. We're lucky.
And that's
So,
in Kansas.
That's in Kansas.
That's kind of different. So, like, especially on the corridor that I am, harvest usually was one of the problems with the
Yep.
handling wet Kernza really get dry. That's kind of why we went to swathing. We can reliably know we can take it out and feel dry.
Yep.
Combine's better.
Yep.
Everything, life goes better when it's dry.
Yep. Yeah. So, and it seemed like a majority of the people here are doing our swathing and using a pickup header. Is that right? So, the only thing I'll say about that, one of the reasons that we stopped, and I stopped providing guidance, is that especially in organic fields or first-year fields, well, depending on the height that you swath it out, we ended up with tons and tons of weed seed in our samples, and it's not very fun to have to change screens between every single lot. I mean, we're doing that almost anyways, but there's a lot of risk pulling that stuff out later. So it's good to have clean fields. Now I'm lost. I had a plan. I don't remember where we are anymore, which is maybe better. This is probably good. So
Can I throw one thing out there? And maybe just jump on camera real quick. But one thing I do to kind of get a sense of, I do some hand threshing, and maybe that doesn't make sense for this particular year, but it helps me develop a sense of how the grain is.
You kind of like turn your body this way as you're sticking more of the thing.
So what I do is I get some Kernza heads, and then I just maybe have a pair of gloves on and then rub them between my hands. And you can do that, and start when the Kernza is green, and you rub it, and nothing comes apart. And then as the Kernza gets more and more mature, then you'll rub it, and then it'll just be naked rake eye and all the florets that will have shelled off. So just kind of helps me kind of develop kind of some intuition, I think.
and I peel individual florets, individual seeds, and I start looking at the color. Is it green? Well, then it's way too early. It'll start turning kind of a pale tan color. Eventually it's brown, but you shouldn't be able to pinch it apart really easy. That means it's still in the early dough or milk stages, right? And then, I don't want it to be flexible. Sometimes you can take that kernel between your fingers and bend it in half, and I don't want that to happen either. It should crack pretty easily where we are. That's for straight cutting. I'm gonna walk over by Richard so he can talk on the microphone. I don't know how you decide when it's ready to swath and pick up.
You can get by with a little bit greener when you're swathing. Again, being your direct harvesting, and especially if you're trying to take it dry, it needs to be mature. But swathing, you can get by with a little bit of green. You will mature a little bit in the windrow. Not a lot green, a little bit green.
Is this a
what I'm talking
bar
about.
machine
So
or spike?
those soft kernels, if they're in the soft dough stage, they're going to harden up and be fine. But generally, what I'm looking for is you'll see the top floret at the plant. If you see some of those starting to break off a little bit, that's usually a sign we're ready to swath.
Okay.
And they'll still, there's still enough unevenness. You'll find green ones out there, but that'll even up in the swath. So.
Thank you. The other thing to think about,
Have you all noticed that a lot of times, like the top of the stem has more blanks in it than kind of the bottom? Is there anything to that, or?
that happens. Yeah. Yeah. Some of it's due to shattering, probably. Some of it might just be due to failed pollination. But Richard was just saying that's how he kind of knows it's ready to harvest, is you start seeing the tips either break off or seed falling out of the head there. So, do you want to talk about how high you swath it?
So when we swath, we're probably leaving somewhere around this much stubble. There's a lot of straw there. The windrow will sit up on top of that stubble pretty easily. And again, don't want to put anything more through the machine than we have to, but at the same time, you got to get it short enough so it doesn't fall down through the stubble. And then it's miserable to pick up.
One thing that we do when it's first year crops, when you have a lot of space between the rows, is we'll windrow it at an angle.
Diagonally.
And then it keeps that windrow on top of the crown so you can actually pick it up, or else it falls down and you can't get it. And then make sure that you got good teeth on your pickup head. Sometimes you just have to change them out and put new ones on because they just get so short that they can't get and pick them up.
They get angled tips, they get really soft tips, so the square, the pickup teeth should have kind of a square end to them. But you were talking about analogous settings for combines. Not every combine book will have it in it, but if it does have a setting for perennial ryegrass, that's probably as close to Kernza.
Okay.
Not so much for cylinder speed, but for fan speed and sieve settings, it'll get you somewhere in the ballpark.
Somebody asked about headers earlier. So the 925F that I have, originally I didn't have a full fingered auger, and that helps a lot, especially once you get out wide. That helps material flowing a lot smoother, prevents it from slugging it if you're in a hurry. So that helps a lot. We've used both Draper and you can it's helpful at the beginning to have someone kind of walk next to you to let you know how high you've got the head set. You want to be as high as possible. And then as you start going, you can see next to you the previous pass, how close are you to that, and so kind of go with it. So.
Brandon, here in Minnesota, we especially notice like in spring wheat, it's getting close to right when the head starts hanging down. We've also sort of talked about when the seed heads on the Kernza start arching, we're getting closer to the harvest. Does that appear the same way in Kansas?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, so Carmen asked if the head starts curving a little bit, arching a little bit, is that a good sign that it's getting close to harvest? I think maybe. It also might mean you have good test weight Kernza that's bigger seeds that we don't get to see that often in Kansas. But maybe Richard has something.
I haven't paid attention, Carmen. It's more looking at the very top florets, and what they're doing, and the lower ones are hard. Putting your fingernail into them, if you leave a dent, they're.
Yep. The other thing I was going to talk about, some of the newer machines. So the newer machines, rotary machines, the hardest part for us has been reducing rotor loss, and it's hard to see rotor loss unless you turn off your spreader and see what's falling on top of it. So that's something to check for too. I don't know if you have had a lot of experience with that, but
yeah, we're mostly harvesting with rotors, and again, it's a challenge. Some of it's setting your speed and flow of material through the machine. That obviously the more material you're trying to push through it, the more likely you are to push it out the back. But but on rotors, we'll do the same thing as you would on a conventional. Tight and fast, and again, dropping the straw and seeing what's happening in the straw is a good first step.
Can you define rotor loss?
Well, it's stuff that's actually carrying in the rotor itself. It's not dropping down to the sieves at all. It's just going out the end of the rotor.
So it hasn't threshed from the head?
It could be that it's threshed from the head and just isn't getting thrown out of the straw, or it could be that it's unthreshed too.
So never hits the sieves to actually fall in. It's never, the grain never comes out of the separator, either because it's not threshed or because it's...
Yeah, on a rotor machine, it's a direct path out of the back of the rotor to the straw chopper. So if it isn't out by the time it hits the end of the rotor,
it's gone.
It's gone.
Okay, so insufficiently threshed?
Can be both. I mean, the threshing thing is probably more related to the clearance, and the getting it separated out is probably more related to speed.
So it might be pushing too hard on speed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or, it's centrifugal force that forces the seed out in a rotary. So if you don't have your rotor fast enough, it's harder to spin it out. But, kind of depends on the amount of material in there too.
I have a question for Brandon.
Yeah.
Maybe not a good question. But we had a couple years where, like 2020 to 2022, I feel like there was more moisture here in Minnesota. 23 and 24, I noticed drier summers, drier falls, and in the field, I just noticed more deadheads, smaller seeds. Just, would you approach harvesting differently if you felt like you had more of those deadheads and smaller seeds? How would you approach that differently, or not really?
I don't think that I wouldn't do that much different, I don't think, so.